I never imagined I'd be here. Not like this anyway. Not in a dark, musty basement with the smell of mildew and old furniture, trying to wrap my head around how I got trapped in this nightmare. The walls are cold, and the only sound I can hear is the faint hum of the furnace. I feel the floor creak under me as I sit against the concrete wall, my knees drawn up to my chest, my hands gripping my arms as if that might stop the tremors coursing through me. I'm 55 years old, and my name is Carol Dawson. I spent most of my life taking care of my family, raising my son, Brian, and building a home for us. My husband, Frank, passed away 5 years ago, and since then, it's been just Brian and me. Or at least, it was supposed to be. I always thought that the bond between a mother and her child was something unbreakable. After all, I did everything for him, gave up my career to stay home, made sure he was loved, and protected him from the harsh world outside. But now, I realize I was wrong. I was so wrong. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. Brian had been living at home again after his divorce. He'd been having a tough time adjusting to life without his wife, trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. I understood. Divorce is hard on anyone, let alone someone as young as him. I tried to be supportive, to give him space, but also let him know I was there if he needed anything. He'd been working part-time at a local hardware store and had a few friends he hung out with. He'd occasionally tell me about the latest gossip or how his co-workers were, but it was always surface-level stuff. Nothing deep, nothing that gave me any cause for concern. But one day, something changed. It wasn't the usual small talk. It was the way he looked at me like he had some secret he was holding on to, something he couldn't say, but that was eating him up inside. I noticed it at dinner one evening. We were having spaghetti, his favorite meal, and he was unusually quiet. I didn't press him. I never did, especially after the divorce. He needed time to heal. But that night, as I passed him the bread basket, I noticed him staring at me, his brow furrowed. "Mom," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant, "I need to ask you something." I could tell something was bothering him. My stomach tightened. He hadn't looked at me like that in years, not since he was a teenager when he would come to me with problems he didn't want anyone else to know about. I put my fork down, focusing all my attention on him. "What is it, honey?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm, though my heart was starting to race. He shifted in his chair, his hands resting on the table in front of him. "I think it's time we had a conversation about the house." That word. It was the first time he had ever mentioned anything about the house in such a way. My heart skipped a beat. Frank and I had worked hard to pay off the mortgage, to make sure Brian always had a safe, stable place to call home. It wasn't just a house, it was a part of us. It was our family's history, the place where all our memories were stored. "Why?" I asked, my voice sounding weaker than I intended. "What about the house?" Brian didn't answer right away. He just stared at his plate, tapping his fingers against the edge of his glass. Then, in the quietest voice I had ever heard him use, he spoke again. "I've been thinking about the future, Mom," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. "And I think it's time we made some changes. You know, maybe it's time for me to take over." My mind raced as I tried to process what he was saying. I stared at him, trying to read his expression. Brian had always been a good son, at least, that's what I thought. He never showed any interest in taking over the house, in making decisions about it. Frank and I had always been the ones to handle that. But now, as I looked at him, a strange chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just about the house, it was about something else. Something more. "Brian, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What kind of changes?" He shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "I think it's time for you to move out, Mom." The words hit me like a slap to the face. My mind went blank. Move out? But this was my home. This was where I had raised him, where I had spent my life. How could he say that? How could he even suggest it? I didn't know how to respond at first. I just sat there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Brian had never been one to talk about moving away, let alone kicking me out. It didn't make sense. Brian, this is my home, I said, my voice rising. You can't just tell me to leave. His face hardened. It's not just about the house, Mom. It's about everything. You're holding me back. The words stung, but I wasn't ready to give in. Holding you back? I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. How? Brian stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with a force that startled me. You've been living in the past, Mom. You won't let go. You won't let me move on, and it's not healthy. You're smothering me. You're holding onto this house like it's the only thing that matters. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Not like this. I'm not smothering you, Brian, I said, my voice quiet now, desperate to make him understand. I'm just trying to be here for you. I've always tried to take care of you. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there, stunned and shaking. That night, I went to bed with a heavy heart. I couldn't understand what had changed, what had made him turn on me so suddenly. But that was just the beginning. The next morning, when I woke up, everything seemed off. There was a silence in the house, a coldness that I couldn't shake. Brian was still asleep in his room, but something felt wrong. I didn't know what was coming. I had no idea that my own son, the person I had cared for and loved my whole life, would soon lock me in the basement, trapping me in a place where I felt invisible, where I no longer knew where I belonged. It started small. At first, it was just him ignoring me more, leaving the house without a word, not returning my calls. But one day, while I was cleaning out the basement, something I had done dozens of times before, Brian told me I needed to go down there and stay there for a while. He said the house was too crowded and that he wanted some space. I figured it was just another one of his mood swings, but I was wrong. He locked the door. The sound of the lock clicking behind me is the moment I lost everything. It was subtle, almost like a whisper against the thick air of the basement, but that click, it was a death knell. My son had locked me in. I couldn't believe it. For the first few moments, I stood there, staring at the door, hoping that somehow I had misunderstood. Maybe it was just an accident, right? Maybe he'd come back and apologize for the way he spoke to me last night. Maybe he hadn't meant to lock me in, but the seconds stretched into minutes, then hours. Brian didn't come back, and I started to realize the reality of my situation. I was trapped. The basement was dank, dark, and smelled of dust and decay. Not the kind of space you'd want to spend an extended period of time in, but I'd spent enough time in it over the years to know it like the back of my hand. It was a place where I stored old boxes of photos and family heirlooms, a place that had never once made me feel uneasy. But now, as I sat in the corner, my arms wrapped around my knees for warmth, it felt like a tomb. I tried to think, tried to make sense of it all. I replayed everything in my mind, as if by going over it again, I might uncover a clue, some explanation that would make it all okay. But nothing made sense. Brian had always been independent. That was true. But he was also my son. I had done everything for him, sacrificed my own happiness, my career, everything. I gave him all the love a mother could give, and now he was locking me in a basement. It was like the rug had been pulled out from under me. My hands were trembling as I wiped away a tear. But even as the tears fell, I knew I couldn't give in to fear. Not yet. I got up slowly, my body stiff from sitting in the same position for so long, and walked to the door. I rattled the knob, half expecting it to just open, for Brian to have come to his senses and unlocked it. But of course, it didn't budge. I pounded on the door, shouting his name, my voice hoarse from the panic building in my chest. Brian, open this door right now, I cried, my voice rising in a crescendo of desperation. Nothing. There was no answer, just the eerie silence that had settled around me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the quiet. I could hear faint sounds from upstairs, distant voices, the creak of the floorboards, but nothing that made me feel any closer to being free. My heart was beating fast, too fast, my thoughts spiraling into places I didn't want to go. I stepped back from the door and turned to face the rest of the basement. The furnace sat in the corner, rusted and old, the pipes running along the walls like veins, carrying the warm air that I had once taken for granted. There were the old boxes, some of them sealed tight with tape, others open and spilling their contents onto the floor. The smell of mildew was stronger now, more insistent. I could feel it in my chest, in my lungs. As I breathed in the damp air, I thought about how this used to be just a simple part of the house. A place to store things, a place to forget about the things you didn't need to see every day. But now it felt like a prison. I found a small window near the ceiling, too high to reach, but I climbed onto an old wooden crate and tried to peer through it. It was covered in grime, but I could just make out the shape of the yard beyond. There was no one out there, no sign of movement, no help. I could feel my heart sinking again. No one knew I was down here, no one except Brian, and he wasn't coming. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring out at nothing, before I heard the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then the steps grew louder. Someone was coming down the stairs, the sound echoing through the narrow wooden staircase. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Mom?" It was Brian's voice, muffled through the door. I tried to call out, but my throat felt tight. I couldn't get a sound past my lips. I tried again, louder this time. "Brian, what's going on? Why are you doing this?" There was a long pause before I heard him speak again, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. "You need to stay down there, Mom. You'll be safer this way." "Safer?" My mind couldn't grasp it. "Safer?" "Brian, I don't understand. What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. Instead, I heard the sound of him walking away, his footsteps growing fainter until they disappeared completely. I stood there for a moment, just trying to process what had just happened. My son, the person I had raised, had locked me in this basement, and he had no intention of letting me out. Panic flared in my chest, but I shoved it down, forcing myself to think clearly. I needed to get out. I needed to escape, to get out of this house, away from him, away from whatever twisted idea he had in his mind. I looked around the basement again, desperately searching for anything that might help me. I needed a plan. I couldn't just sit here and wait for Brian to come back and do God knows what. The old crate I had stood on earlier was still near the window. I walked over to it and tried to shift it, hoping it would give me a boost, maybe something to climb on. It was heavy, but I managed to shift it far enough to get a better angle on the window. My hands were shaking, my mind racing with every possibility. I wasn't strong enough to break the window, not with my bare hands, but maybe if I could find something to use as leverage. I dug through the old boxes in the corner, finding a rusty crowbar hidden beneath a pile of old newspapers. My heart leapt. This might work. I lifted the crowbar, the cold metal biting into my palms as I positioned it against the window frame. With all my strength, I began to pry it loose. The metal screeched in protest, but I kept at it, every movement filled with the desperate hope that I could escape before Brian came back, but the window didn't budge. The frame was old and stubborn, and no matter how much force I used, it refused to give. I cursed under my breath, frustration mounting as I realized I was no closer to freedom than when I first started. As the hours dragged on, I began to lose track of time. I hadn't eaten or drunk anything since the morning, and I felt my energy draining. My thoughts started to wander. What had happened to Brian? What had gone so horribly wrong? Why had he done this to me? It's funny how time stretches when you're trapped. Hours feel like days. The sound of the ticking clock upstairs, muffled by the walls, serves as a constant reminder that I am, at the very least, alive. But that doesn't make me feel any better. Alive and trapped. Alive and forgotten. I'd given up on trying to break out of the window. The crowbar hadn't helped, and now the window frame was too damaged to even try again. I just sat on the cold floor, my back against the stone wall, staring at the same things I'd seen for hours. The old boxes, the musty smell of dust and decay, the silence that seemed to press in on me like a physical. Wait, that's when I noticed it, a small box tucked behind the stack of photo albums on the bottom shelf of an old wooden cabinet in the far corner of the basement. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a shoebox, but it stood out to me because of the way it was placed. It wasn't like the other boxes that were scattered about carelessly. This one was deliberately set aside, as if it was something important, something that had been hidden on purpose. My heart started to beat a little faster. I stood up, my knees creaking from sitting for so long, and walked over to the cabinet. The box was covered in a thin layer of dust, and I carefully slid it out, trying not to disturb anything. It wasn't locked. In fact, it wasn't sealed at all. The lid came off with the slightest pressure, and I felt a jolt of anxiety rush through me. What was inside? Inside the box, there were papers, lots of them stacked neatly. Old letters, documents, and what looked like faded photographs. But there, at the very top, was something that caught my eye immediately. A letter. It was addressed to me, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It took me a moment to recognize it. Frank's handwriting. My late husband. My heart stopped for a moment. What was this? Why had Frank left me a letter, hidden away in the basement, after all these years? I carefully opened the letter, feeling the weight of it in my hands, the smell of old paper filling my nose. The letter was dated just a year before Frank died. He had never mentioned anything about writing to me, and the idea of him leaving something hidden in the basement, it didn't make sense. I read it aloud to myself, though the words felt foreign coming out of my mouth. Carol, it began, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong. Something I should have done long ago, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused you, and I know I can't make things right now. But you need to know the truth. I could feel my pulse quicken. The letter felt too serious, too filled with emotion. I read on, my hands shaking as I held the paper. You and I have always been able to make it through the hard times together. But there's one thing I've kept from you, something I've hidden for years. It's about Brian. You need to know that he's been keeping secrets from you. Secrets I should have told you about, but I was afraid. He's changed, Carol. He's not the boy you raised. He's a man consumed by anger, by something darker that I can't explain. And it's going to destroy us. I stopped for a moment, my breath catching in my throat. What was he talking about? Brian? Angry? How could Frank say such things about our son? Brian had always been difficult in his own way, but nothing like this. He wasn't a monster. I forced myself to keep reading. I've tried to reach him, tried to talk to him about it. But he's closed off, and he's manipulating you, Carol. I don't know when it started, but it's been going on for years. He's been using you, controlling you, and I'm afraid he's going to do something terrible if we don't stop him now. I read the letter again, slowly this time, letting the words sink in. What had Frank meant by using and controlling? Had I been blind to something? I felt a knot twist in my stomach. How could I not have seen it? I had always trusted Brian, but now, I was starting to wonder if I had missed something huge, something important. I continued reading. I know you'll be angry at me for not telling you sooner, but I didn't want to believe it, Carol. I didn't want to believe our son could be capable of what I think he's capable of. But the signs are there, and if you don't believe me, then I'm afraid you'll see it for yourself. The last line was a punch in the gut. I'm sorry. Carol, I love you, but I can't protect you from him anymore. He's already planning something. If I'm gone, you need to be strong. You need to watch him carefully. Don't let him get away with this. Please, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm afraid I'm not. The letter ended abruptly. The ink smudged in places, as if Frank had been writing quickly, as if he had something urgent to say before time ran out. I sat back against the wall, the letter still clutched in my hands. Frank's words echoed in my mind. He's manipulating you, I could feel the weight of that statement pressing on my chest. Had Brian been playing me all these years? Had he been pretending, hiding something from me all along? I didn't know what to think. The letter wasn't just a warning, it was a call to action. Frank had known something, had seen something in Brian that I hadn't. But what? What had Frank seen? What had Brian done that was so terrible? I put the letter down on the floor and rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the fog in my mind. This couldn't be real. Brian wasn't a bad person. I refused to believe that, but as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was missing something important. Frank's letter had opened a door to a part of my son's life that I hadn't seen, and now I had to face the uncomfortable truth that I might have been blind to it all along. The sound of footsteps above me made my heart jump in my chest. Someone was coming down the stairs again. I held my breath, hoping it wasn't Brian. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. But whoever it was, they were getting closer. The footsteps were unmistakable this time, heavy, deliberate, and not the kind of steps you make when you're just walking around. No, these were purposeful. These were the steps of someone who knew exactly where they were going, and they were heading straight for the basement. I felt my heart hammer in my chest, and for the first time since Brian locked me in, I began to feel a true sense of fear. I wasn't just locked in a basement anymore. I wasn't just locked away. I was about to face him again, the son I thought I knew, the son I had raised, the son who had now turned on me in a way I never could have imagined. I quickly wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, hoping the wetness of my tears wouldn't give me away. I couldn't let him see me as weak. Not now. I had to figure this out. I had to understand what was happening and why he was doing this. I could hear him getting closer, the sound of his boots dragging against the wooden steps echoing in the quiet of the house. Every step seemed to stretch out the tension in the air, making it harder to breathe. I glanced around the basement once more, my eyes falling on the dusty old furniture, the boxes of memories that had once brought comfort to me. But now they felt like part of the prison I was trapped in. The door to the basement creaked as Brian opened it. I couldn't see him yet, but I could feel the coldness of his presence even before he stepped into the room. The dim light from the hallway illuminated the edge of the basement steps, and then, finally, he appeared at the bottom. He was standing there, just staring at me. His face was a mask of cold indifference, like he had already made up his mind about everything. And for the first time, I felt as though I was no longer looking at my son. This wasn't Brian. This was someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. Brian. I whispered his name, but my voice felt foreign, unsure. I was trying to keep my composure, trying to make sense of everything, but I could barely manage to form the words. His expression didn't change. He stood there, arms crossed over his chest, looking down at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. "What do you want, Mom?" His voice was flat, like he was asking about the weather, not about the woman he had just locked in a basement. "I want to know what's going on," I said, my voice steadier now. "Why are you doing this? Why are you locking me down here? What have I done to deserve this?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked closer, slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving mine. I felt like a cornered animal, trapped and unsure of what he would do next. My breath quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. "I'm not doing this because of something you've done, Mom," he said, his voice still cold, almost detached. "I'm doing this because of what you failed to do." I furrowed my brow, confused. "Failed to do? What are you talking about?" Brian shook his head as if I were too stupid to understand something obvious. "You've been holding me back. All these years, you've been clinging to this idea that I'm the same person I was when I was a kid. You haven't seen what I've become. You haven't seen how I've changed." My mind raced. I tried to process what he was saying, but it didn't make sense. "What do you mean, Brian? You're my son. Nothing's changed between us. I've always been here for you." He gave a bitter laugh. a sound so unlike the Brian I knew that it sent a chill through my veins. You've always been here for me, sure, but you haven't been here for yourself. You're stuck in the past, in this fantasy of what things should be. I've had to grow up, Mom. I had to make something of myself. The words cut deep, but I didn't let them show. You think I haven't tried to grow with you? I said, my voice shaking. I've done everything for you, Brian. I've put my life on hold for you, time and time again. And this is how you repay me, by locking me in a basement? His eyes hardened, and he took another step toward me. You're a burden, Mom. You don't get it, do you? I've been trying to help you for years, and you just won't change. You don't even see how much you're holding me back from living my life. I felt my stomach drop. The air was thick with tension, and every word that came out of his mouth made it harder to breathe. You're wrong, Brian, I said, my voice more forceful now. I've been nothing but supportive. I've always wanted you to succeed. But this isn't success. This is cruelty, he smirked, and it was the kind of smirk that sent a wave of disgust through me. You think I'm being cruel? You don't even know the half of it, I recoiled, unsure of what he meant. But I knew something was wrong, something deep and dark inside of him had taken hold. This wasn't just about the house. This wasn't just about his supposed freedom. This was about control. Brian, I said, my voice softer now, trying to reach him. What's really going on? You're not yourself. I don't know what's happened to you, but this isn't you. You don't have to do this. Please, just let me out of here. We can talk about this, but he shook his head, his eyes narrowing. No, Mom, I'm done talking. You had your chance to understand me, but you never did. You're not the woman I thought you were either. I didn't know what to say. I was stunned. His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. This wasn't my son. This wasn't the boy I had raised. Something had changed inside him, and it was like I was staring at a stranger. Brian, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You're not alone. I'm still your mother. Don't push me away, please. But the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He was beyond reasoning. He had already made his decision. I'm not your little boy anymore, Mom, he said, his voice cold and detached. I'm the man who's finally taking control of his life. And you're just in the way. With that, he turned and walked toward the stairs, his footsteps heavy and unyielding. I sat there in the silence, feeling like a piece of me had been ripped away. I didn't know how it had happened. I didn't know when things had gone so wrong. But I knew one thing. Brian was lost to me, and I had to find a way out before it was too late. The footsteps faded into the distance, and with them, the last shred of hope I had left. Brian had turned his back on me, his own mother, and I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand how the boy I had raised, the child I had nurtured, could transform into someone so cold, so distant. But there was something else, something darker that gnawed at me now, something that was just out of reach. I had to know what it was. I had to understand why he had done this to me. I sat in the silence, the weight of his words pressing down on me. You're just in the way. Those words echoed in my mind, growing louder and louder until I felt like I couldn't escape them. But there was one thing I knew for sure: I couldn't just sit here and wait. Not when I knew something was wrong. Not when I had the feeling that Brian was hiding something from me. I stood up, wiping the dust off my clothes, trying to shake off the panic that threatened to rise again. I needed to keep my head clear. I needed to think. Frank's letter, it had to be the key. Frank had written it for a reason. He had known something about Brian that I didn't, and it was time I figured out what that was. The box I had found earlier, the one with the letter from Frank, still sat on the floor. I knelt down and opened it again, rifling through the papers inside. There had to be something else, some clue, some sign that would point me in the right direction. The letter had been full of cryptic warnings, but it hadn't given me enough. Not yet. As I dug through the pile of old letters and documents, my fingers brushed against something unusual. It was a thick envelope, sealed with a red wax stamp. I pulled it out, turning it over in my hands. The handwriting on the front was familiar. It was Brian's. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a letter. This was a secret. A secret Brian had kept from me. But why? Why would he write something like this? My mind raced with questions, but I forced myself to open it carefully. The envelope was old, yellowing at the edges, and I could tell it had been opened before. My hands trembled as I pulled the letter out and began to read. Mom, I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's because I can't keep this to myself any longer. Maybe it's because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't. But I need to tell you the truth about what happened. My breath caught in my throat. The truth? What truth was he talking about? I know you won't believe this, but I've been keeping a secret from you for years. A secret about the money, about Dad's business, about everything. I didn't want you to find out, not like this. But now it's too late. It's all going to come out, and I don't know how to stop it. The letter continued, but the words were blurry as my vision blurred with tears. Money? Business? What was he talking about? Dad was hiding money. A lot of it. And I found out. I found out that he had been funneling money from his business for years, setting up a trust, taking loans, and using it all to make sure we would be taken care of when he was gone. But I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you, Mom. I didn't want you to know that he was doing things that weren't legal. And I thought if I just kept quiet, everything would be fine. I stopped reading, my heart racing. Frank had been hiding money? I had known that Frank had run a business, but I didn't know it had been anything like this. I didn't know he had been doing something illegal, and then the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. Brian had known about this money. All these years, he had been aware of the secret Frank had kept, and he had used it. He had used it to manipulate me, to control me, to set himself up for whatever plan he had. I didn't know what to think. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. All those years of believing in Brian, trusting him, thinking he was a good son, what had I missed? How had I been so blind? I read the rest of the letter, my hands shaking. I've been using the money to buy my freedom, to get away from you, from all of this. I know you'll hate me when you find out, but I don't care anymore. I can't stay in this house, in this life, pretending that everything is fine. I'm going to take the money and leave. I'm going to start over. I don't want to be the person you think I am, but I don't know how else to do this. I closed my eyes, trying to process everything I had just read. Brian had been planning this for years. He had been planning to leave, to take everything for himself, and all along, I had been none the wiser. The truth was slowly sinking in, and with it came a wave of cold, bitter anger. All these years, I had been giving Brian everything. I had been supporting him, helping him, thinking that I was doing what was best for him. But all along, he had been using me, manipulating me, and I had let it happen. I had been too blind to see it. The letter dropped from my hands, fluttering to the floor like a leaf caught in the wind. I sat back, trying to breathe, but the room felt smaller and smaller. The walls were closing in on me, and I could feel the panic rising again. I couldn't stay here. Not like this. Not anymore. But just as I stood up, ready to make my move, I heard a noise, a faint sound, like something shifting upstairs. I froze. My mind was racing again, my heart pounding in my chest. Who was it? Was it Brian? Or was it someone else? I grabbed the letter and stuffed it into my pocket, knowing that whatever was coming next, I needed to be ready. The faint noise upstairs lingered in the air, hanging like a dark omen. I couldn't breathe properly, couldn't focus on anything except the question that had taken hold of my mind. What now? I had the letter. The damning evidence. Brian's betrayal was no longer a whispered suspicion, it was a hard, brutal fact. But that didn't change the fact that I was still locked in the basement, still alone and trapped. And what I had just discovered about him, that he had been hiding something so dark from me for years, felt like an anchor tied to my chest, pulling me down into an abyss I didn't know how to escape from. I couldn't just sit here and wait for the inevitable. The letter was more than a warning. It was a battle cry. I had to get out. I had to face Brian. I stood up, the floor beneath me creaking, the cold of the basement seeping into my bones. The air felt heavier now, pressing down on me like the weight of all the years I had spent in this house. I looked around the dim room, my heart pounding. The light from the small basement window was faint, but enough to make the dust particles in the air dance like tiny ghosts. And then, just as the tension was becoming unbearable, I heard the steps again. Louder this time, more deliberate. Brian. He was coming. I didn't know if I was ready for this confrontation. Hell, I didn't know if I'd ever be ready, but I knew it was inevitable. The truth had finally found me, and now I had to face him. I had no choice. I took a deep breath and made my way to the bottom of the stairs. As I reached the door to the basement, I felt a surge of determination. No more running. No more avoiding the truth. It was time for the final confrontation. I rattled the door handle, though I knew it wouldn't open. But I didn't care. It was a symbolic act, a way to steel myself for what was coming. And then, I heard the unmistakable sound of Brian's voice from the top of the stairs. "Mom," he called out, his tone mockingly calm. "Are you ready to talk?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. There was no use hiding anymore. It was now or never. "What's this about, Brian?" I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on? Why have you been lying to me?" The silence stretched on for a moment, and then, as if on cue, the sound of his footsteps echoed through the basement, and the door swung open. Brian stood in the doorway, his face expressionless, his eyes cold, empty, locked with mine. It felt like I was staring at a stranger, not my son. I had never seen him like this before. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even frustrated. He just was, and that alone made everything even more terrifying. "I didn't want to do this, Mom," he said, his voice low and controlled. "But you forced my hand." I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Instead, I let the words from Frank's letter replay in my mind. "You need to watch him carefully." Frank had known. He had seen it coming. And now I understood why. "Brian, what's happening?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to remain calm. "What do you want from me?" He stepped inside, the door closing softly behind him, leaving us alone in the dimly lit basement. The air was thick, the silence oppressive. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He just stared at me, like he was waiting for me to break, to beg for his forgiveness, but I wouldn't. "Not this time. I don't want anything from you, Mom," he finally said, his voice quiet but piercing. "I'm done pretending. I'm done with all the lies. This life we've been living, it was a lie. You were the one who was holding me back, always keeping me tied to this place. I needed to get out. I needed to find my own way." "You don't understand, Brian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're not free. You've trapped yourself, just like you've trapped me. You've been lying to me, using me, and now, you think you can just walk away from everything? From all of this?" He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You don't get it, do you? You've always thought you could control me, tell me what to do, how to live my life, but I'm not that boy anymore. I'm not your son anymore." I felt a chill run down my spine. His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. The man standing before me was not the child I had raised. This was someone else entirely. "Brian," I said, trying to reach him, trying to make him see reason. "I loved you. I always loved you. But this isn't who you are. You don't have to do this. There's still time. We can fix this." He shook his head again, this time more forcefully. "It's too late for that, Mom. It was never about fixing things. It was about getting what I deserve. I've spent my whole life living under your shadow, under Dad's, but I'm done. I've got a life to live, and I'm going to do it on my terms. No more of this." I could feel the air in the basement get colder. The space between us felt so vast now, like a chasm I could never cross. Brian's eyes were hard, unyielding. There was no trace of the child I had loved, The man I had tried so desperately to help. You don't deserve anything, Brian, I said, my voice finally rising, filled with anger. You've been stealing from me, from your father. You've been hiding this all along, and now you think you can just walk away? Take the money and leave me here to rot? His lips curled into a smirk. What are you going to do about it, Mom? What can you possibly do? I felt the fury building inside me, but I knew that rage wasn't going to help. I needed to stay calm, to stay focused. I'll tell everyone what you've done, I said, my voice steady now. I'll tell the police. I'll tell everyone about the money, about the lies. I'll make sure they know who you really are. For a moment, Brian's expression faltered. Just a moment. But then the coldness returned, and he stepped forward, his face inches from mine. You can try, he said, his voice low and menacing. But you're not going to get out of here, Mom. Not unless I say so. I felt a sudden wave of dread wash over me. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I knew that I had only one option left. The truth was out now. Brian's lies, his manipulation, it was all out in the open. But now, it was time for me to take control. The coldness in Brian's eyes hit me like a slap, more painful than any words he could have said. I had spent so long believing he was just lost, confused, or acting out in the wake of his father's death, but now standing before me, face to face, he wasn't a broken man. He was something else entirely. He was a stranger, a man who had learned to mask his emotions with bitterness and cruelty. Someone who was willing to destroy the only family he had left for a prize he didn't even deserve. As he stood there, so close I could feel the chill of his anger, I realized something. I couldn't keep backing down. I couldn't keep letting him manipulate me. I had given him every opportunity to change, to come back to the boy I raised, but he had burned every bridge. Now, it was my turn to fight back. You think you can scare me, Brian? I said, my voice shaky but gaining strength with each word. You think I'm going to sit here and let you take everything? He scoffed, his lips curling into a smile that was nothing short of sinister. You're pathetic, Mom. You always have been. You've been weak your whole life, letting everyone walk all over you. First, it was Dad, then it was me. But not anymore. This is my time. I've earned it. I stood taller, shaking off the trembling fear in my legs, forcing myself to hold my ground. You haven't earned anything. You've stolen it all. From me, from your father. You've been planning this for years. You're not a man, Brian. You're a coward. His eyes flashed with anger, but before he could say anything, I continued, You're not going to walk away from this. You're going to face the consequences of what you've done. I'll go to the police. I'll tell them everything about the money you've been hiding, about the lies you've told me. You won't get away with this. Brian's expression shifted then, just for a moment. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but something closer, something that looked like doubt. He took a step back, just enough to give me space, but his eyes never left mine. You really think they'll believe you? He asked, his voice low, cold. A grieving mother locked in a basement, accusing her son of something as serious as this. You're out of your mind. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the truth I was about to reveal. You've underestimated me, Brian. I may be in this basement, but I'm not the fool you think I am. I found the letter you wrote, the one you thought I would never see, the one where you confessed everything. His face twitched, his jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. I could see the panic in his eyes now, the cracks in his thoughts starting to show. You thought I wouldn't figure it out, I continued. You thought you could play me, manipulate me, and get away with it. But the truth always comes to light, Brian. Always. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The weight of the silence pressed on me, but this time, it wasn't fear I felt. It was something else. It was determination. Brian let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth in the dim light of the basement. It was like watching someone try to contain a storm that had already started to rage. You don't understand, Mom. he said, stopping suddenly and turning to face me again. I didn't do this because I hate you. I did it because I was sick of waiting, sick of being stuck in this house, stuck in this life. You wouldn't let me go, and now I had to do it myself. I had to break free. I shook my head slowly, my heart breaking all over again. This isn't freedom, Brian. This is destruction. You've burned every bridge you've ever had. And for what? Money? Power? You'll never be free as long as you keep lying to yourself. His expression faltered for a brief moment, and for the first time since this started, I saw something in his eyes, something close to regret. But it was fleeting. It disappeared almost as quickly as it had come. I don't need your help anymore, he said, his voice hardening once more. I'm done with you, Mom, and I'm done with this house. Without warning, he turned and started to head for the basement door. It was like he had made up his mind. He wasn't listening to me anymore. He wasn't going to change. I watched him walk toward the door, and for a second, I thought maybe I had lost him for good. Maybe there was no coming back from this, but then something inside me snapped. I couldn't let him go. Not like this. Not without a fight. I had spent too many years sacrificing everything for him, and now, he was walking away without so much as a second glance. Brian? I called out, my voice filled with desperation. Please, don't do this. Don't walk away. He paused at the door, his back to me, and for a second, I thought he might listen. I thought he might turn around, maybe even show some sign of remorse, of the son I had once known, but instead, he did the worst thing he could have done. He locked the door behind him. I heard the click of the lock and then his footsteps fade into the distance. And just like that, I was alone again. I sat back down on the cold, hard floor of the basement, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I had been right about him. Everything Frank had said in the letter had been true. And yet, none of it changed the reality of what had just happened. Brian was gone. And I was trapped in a house I had once loved, a house that had been taken from me by the very person I had cared for the most, but I wasn't going to give up. I couldn't. Not now. It's funny how the mind works when it's on the edge of breaking. The moment Brian locked that door behind him, something inside me snapped, and in that instant, I realized I wasn't the woman I used to be. I wasn't that scared, unsure mother who had always let life happen to her, who had quietly accepted whatever came her way, no matter how much it hurt. The woman in that basement, staring at the door her son had just walked out of, was someone entirely different. She was someone who wasn't going to take this lying down. Not anymore. I knew what I had to do. Brian had thought he could destroy me. He thought locking me in this basement, taking away everything I had worked for, would break me. He thought he could walk away and leave me here, defeated, a casualty of his greed and lies. But he didn't know me, not anymore. I stood up, my legs shaky from sitting so long, but I felt a newfound strength coursing through me. I wasn't going to stay in that basement any longer. I wasn't going to wait for Brian to make his next move. The truth had already started to surface, and I would make sure it came to light no matter what it took. The first thing I did was look around for anything that could help me. I grabbed the old crowbar I had used earlier to try and pry open the window, the one that was now discarded on the floor. I wasn't going to waste any more time. I was done waiting. I wasn't going to let Brian win. I made my way to the small basement window again, my heart pounding in my chest as I used the crowbar to pry at the wooden frame. It wasn't easy. The frame was old, and the wood splintered as I worked, but I was determined. I had to get out. I had to make sure I could expose Brian for who he truly was. The window finally creaked open just enough for me to squeeze through, and though the air outside was bitter and cold, I felt a rush of freedom. I was free from the basement, free from the prison Brian had tried to build around me. But more than that, I felt the first spark of hope I'd felt in days. I knew I had to act fast. I didn't waste time with second-guessing. I didn't stop to think about the possible consequences or how Brian might retaliate. All that mattered now was one thing: justice. I had to make sure that Brian's betrayal, his manipulation, his lies was exposed for the world to see. I went straight to the police station. It wasn't a long walk, but every step felt like it carried the weight of a lifetime of hurt. I could feel the cold wind on my face, but I hardly noticed it. All I could think about was how close I was to making things right, to finally putting an end to Brian's reign of lies. When I walked into the station, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I had the letter. I had the evidence. I had Frank's warning, the proof of Brian's deceit, all the years of manipulation he had built into his carefully crafted lie. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I found an officer at the front desk, and without hesitation, I handed him the letter. "My son," I said, my voice steady, though the words felt heavy in my chest. "He's been hiding money, manipulating me, lying to me for years. He's been planning this for a long time, and I have proof." The officer took the letter, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. But as I told him everything, the secret business dealings, the stolen money, Brian's plan to take everything from me, his expression changed. He listened carefully, asking follow-up questions, taking notes as I spoke. By the time I finished explaining everything, I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He didn't dismiss me. He didn't tell me to calm down or act like this was just a family dispute. He understood. He understood the gravity of what I was saying. "Ma'am," he said after a long pause, "we'll look into this. We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to file a full report. In the meantime, don't leave town. We'll need to speak with your son as well." I nodded, the relief I felt almost overwhelming. I had done it. I had taken the first step toward justice. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I would keep fighting. I wouldn't let Brian destroy me. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, legal forms, and long phone calls with lawyers. But the truth kept coming out. Slowly but surely, Brian's world of lies began to crumble. The money he had stolen from Frank's business, it was traced. His secret bank accounts, exposed. Every move he had made, every lie he had told, was being uncovered. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the years of manipulation, the abuse of trust, and the way he had tried to control everything around him. When the day finally came for Brian to face the music, he was not the confident man he had been when he locked me in that basement. He was different. I saw it in his eyes when they brought him in for questioning. There was a flicker of fear. There was doubt. There was realization. He knew. He knew that the life he had built on lies was about to come crashing down. The charges were serious: fraud, theft, conspiracy. And though Brian tried to deny everything at first, the evidence was overwhelming. The truth couldn't be hidden any longer. As the case moved forward, Brian's world began to fall apart. His friends turned their backs on him. His business dealings were scrutinized. The police uncovered more and more of his web of deceit. It didn't take long before his life as he knew it began to unravel. And me? I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Frank passed, I felt like I was in control. I had faced the hardest truth of my life, the truth about my own son, and I had come out stronger for it. It wasn't easy. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I had learned one invaluable lesson. Never let someone take your voice. Never let someone tell you that you're powerless. Justice may take time, but in the end, it always finds a way. Even when the world is against you, the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, the consequences are always inevitable. Next, the final chapter of this painful journey is about the healing that comes after betrayal. I move on, slowly but surely, finding peace in the life I've reclaimed.